By the time my daughter invited me back into her life, she had already chosen the room where I would spend the rest of mine. Room 214 at Hawthorne Memory Care had one narrow window, a bed bolted to the floor, and an empty nameplate waiting for Buck Lawson. I learned that 3 minutes before I left home for what Goldie called our first real family dinner since my wife died. Please, before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you are listening from today. At 68, I still managed my life and finances without help. Yet my only child had decided I could no longer choose where I lived. Yellow chrysanthemums rested beside my truck keys because they had been Helen's favorite, and Goldie had promised to make her mother's pot roast. For 6 months, my daughter had been returning with apologies, food, and calls that ended with, "Love you, Daddy." I wanted to believe grief had returned her to me. Hope can make an intelligent man cooperate with his own deception. My phone rang as I reached for the flowers. Sterling McGrath appeared on the screen. He had been my attorney for 31 years and had never called on Sunday. "Buck, tell me you are home." I said I was leaving for Goldie's. His answer cut through the house. "Lock your door. Do not go to dinner." I sat on the bottom stair. Sterling told me a clerk in probate court had flagged an emergency petition filed Friday afternoon. Goldie and her husband, Trent, were asking to become my guardians. They claimed I wandered at night, forgot to pay taxes, confused Wesley with a dead brother I never had, and could no longer understand my property. The petition requested temporary control of my accounts, business trust, farmhouse, and medical decisions before I could appear in court. Then Sterling told me about Hawthorne. Attached to the petition was an intake agreement reserving room 214 for Monday morning. Goldie had listed herself as the person authorized to admit me. Trent had signed a preliminary plan to sell my farmhouse to one of his development companies after my placement. "They expected you to be at dinner when the papers were served," Sterling said. "If you became angry or refused an evaluation, they would call it agitation." Goldie had not invited me over to feed me. She needed witnesses to watch me react in a room where she controlled the questions and the story told afterward. My phone buzzed. Goldie had written, "Dinner at 6. Don't be late, Daddy. We have a wonderful surprise." Beneath it was a photograph of Helen's roasting pan on her stove. She had turned her mother's memory into bait. "Tonight, they only need a believable emergency," Sterling warned. "Do not confront them." I wanted to demand the moment I stopped being Goldie's father and became property she could inventory. Instead, I photographed the flowers, my keys, and the clock. Then I called her. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice tired. "I misplaced my truck keys. I may be late." Silence held for half a second. Then I heard Trent whisper, "Ask him where he left them." Goldie's voice softened. "Daddy, do you forget things like that often?" It was not concern. It was an interview. I looked directly at the keys beside Helen's flowers and gave her what she wanted. More often than I should. She exhaled with relief and said they would come get me. Headlights turned onto the road below my farm 20 minutes later. Goldie's SUV climbed the hill, followed by a gray sedan I did not recognize. I switched off the kitchen light and watched both vehicles approach the home my daughter intended to own by morning. She believed she was coming to collect a confused old man. She did not know I was standing in the dark, fully awake, holding the first recording of her lie. The gray sedan stopped first. A woman stepped out carrying a medical bag while Goldie and Trent remained inside their SUV. Sterling was still on the phone. He told me she matched Dr. Marla Voss, the psychiatrist named in the petition. She had never met me, yet her statement already described paranoia, poor judgment, and resistance to family support. Now she was arriving moments after I pretended to lose my keys. The dinner had moved to my house. I started the recorder on my phone and placed it beneath Helen's recipe book. Goldie knocked and called, "Daddy, we came because you sounded confused." 10 minutes earlier, she had offered to pick me up. Now she was manufacturing an emergency. I kept the door chained as Goldie introduced Dr. Voss as a friend who happened to be nearby. The doctor asked the date while Trent recorded me. I answered correctly, then asked why a stranger was testing me on my porch. Goldie sighed. "This is the hostility I mentioned. I said I was tired and wanted to reschedule. Dr. Voss warned that rejecting help could endanger me." Sterling whispered, "Close the door." I wished them good night and locked it. Through the window, I watched Trent point toward my upstairs rooms, while the doctor wrote on a clipboard. After they left, Sterling arrived with a copy of the petition. We examined 12 pages describing a man I did not recognize. Several incidents were dated when I was demonstrably out of town, and one supposedly occurred in a restaurant that had closed 2 years earlier. Their lies relied on my age, making them believable, but other details were real. Goldie knew my cardiologist's name, the balance range of my retirement account, the location of my trust, and the code beside my barn. I had supplied those answers, one harmless question at a time. Sterling asked me to reconstruct every visit. I opened a notebook and began with the day Goldie returned. She carried Helen's apple pie dish, apologized for staying away, and said losing her mother had taught her that time was precious. That afternoon, she asked who would pay my bills if I became ill. Later, she photographed my medicine. Trent copied 3 years of tax statements, and Goldie hid a medical release beneath an emergency contact form. She also began calling after dark and noting how long I took to answer. There had been no reconciliation. There had been 6 months of evidence collection disguised as care. The next morning, Sterling and I tested how far they had reached. My clinic confirmed Goldie requested my records twice. My bank had received an inquiry about whether a guardian could liquidate certificates of deposit. Hawthorne had been given my insurance number, medication list, food preferences, and a warning that I became combative when separated from familiar objects. Then my neighbor Curtis brought footage from his driveway camera. 3 nights earlier, Trent had entered my barn, while Goldie kept me on the telephone. He stayed 14 minutes and left, carrying my blue estate case. It held a copy of my trust, the farmhouse deed, and blank pages bearing my notarized signature from an unfinished transaction. Sterling said questions could support a guardianship case, but those pages could move property. I called Goldie and thanked her for coming the previous night. I said I was embarrassed about forgetting my keys and asked whether Dr. Voss could return. Relief warmed her voice. "Of course, Daddy. Let us handle everything." I looked at the empty shelf where my documents had been and understood the design. Goldie was not merely trying to prove I had forgotten pieces of my life. She was removing them, then waiting for me to notice they were gone. Sterling told me not to report the missing case yet. If Trent believed I had not noticed it, he might reveal what he intended to do with the documents. We replaced the originals in my safe with certified copies, notified the county recorder that no transfer bearing my signature should be accepted without direct verification, and asked Renee Doucette, a financial investigator Sterling trusted, to trace every company connected to my son-in-law. Renee called 48 hours later. "Trent isn't building an empire," she said. "He is holding up a collapsing wall." Vale Ridge Development looked successful online, but behind its luxury photographs were unfinished projects, unpaid contractors, and loans totaling $6.8 million. Investors were demanding records, and banks had refused more credit. The most dangerous loan was personally guaranteed. If Trent failed to pay $940,000 by February 15th, the lender could seize his house, vehicles, and remaining business interests. He had 7 weeks. My assets were not simply attractive to him. They were his last available exit. Renee then showed us an email Trent had sent to a private lender. He promised that family-controlled agricultural property would soon secure a refinancing package. The description matched my farm's acreage exactly. Attached was a valuation prepared without my knowledge, estimating the land at $2.4 million if rezoned for residential construction. Sterling placed the guardianship petition beside the email. As my court-appointed guardian, Goldie could petition to sell the farm for my care. Trent's company could buy it through another entity, use the land to secure new financing, and pay almost nothing until the court discovered the conflict. Hawthorne's $11,600 monthly cost would justify an urgent sale. Room 214 was not protection. It was their invoice for taking my farm. I asked whether Goldie understood Trent's financial condition. Renee opened a bank record showing my daughter had withdrawn $74,000 from an account Helen created for her. The money had entered Vale Ridge in 4 transfers. Goldie had also taken a second mortgage on her home and cashed out Wesley's education fund. She was not an innocent wife, following instructions. She had already sacrificed her son's future to preserve Trent's appearance of success. That afternoon, I received an email from Goldie containing a cheerful brochure for Hawthorne. She said she had toured it only because she wanted me to understand my options. I asked what would happen to the farm if I moved. We would keep it in the family, Goldie answered too quickly. Trent said Vale Ridge could manage it through a temporary stewardship agreement. Renee confirmed the document would let his company use projected land income in loan applications. I pretended to consider signing at our next dinner. That's smart, Buck, Trent said. Let the family carry the hard part. She also found an $18,500 payment from Vale Ridge to Dr. Voss's consulting company. The medical opinion had been purchased with borrowed money. Sterling warned that confronting them would destroy evidence. They needed to believe February could still be saved. That evening, I called my daughter and said the farmhouse felt too quiet without Helen. Goldie softened her voice and told me I would never be alone again once she controlled the difficult decisions. She corrected herself, replacing controlled with helped with, but it was too late. I had recorded the first word. Before hanging up, she asked me to bring my driver's license and trust documents to dinner on Sunday. I promised I would try to remember. Then I opened Helen's desk and found the original deed exactly where she had hidden it years earlier. Trent had stolen a map to my property. He did not yet possess the land. And as long as he believed my mind was failing, he would keep walking toward it without seeing the ground disappear beneath him. On Sunday, I placed a copied deed, an expired driver's license, and a trust document Sterling had marked with an invisible identification code inside the blue case. The originals stayed in Sterling's safe, while Renee fitted a recorder inside my watch. Goldie opened her door before I knocked. She hugged me, took the case from my hand, and set it beside Trent's chair without asking what it contained. That told me the dinner had a purpose before the food was served. Wesley sat at the far end of the table, shoulders tight, eyes fixed on his plate. I wanted to reassure him, but even kindness could expose that I knew. Goldie served Helen's pot roast. Then Trent asked whether I remembered signing a stewardship agreement. Did I sign something? Goldie's face softened with practiced patience. Not yet, Daddy. We discussed it twice. That was false. Trent opened a folder and slid the agreement toward me. It authorized Vale Ridge to lease, mortgage, or sell my land. I pretended the language confused me. When I asked what encumbrance meant, Trent said it meant keeping the grass cut. I tapped the wrong signature line, then asked for the bathroom. In the hallway, I passed their office and saw my original blue case on the desk. They had not merely copied its contents, they had kept it ready. A sticky note on top read, "Get new signature tonight." When I returned, Goldie had poured me another glass of iced tea, although I had barely touched the first. A pale residue clung to the bottom. I switched glasses with Trent while he answered a call. Minutes later, he rubbed his eyes and lost his place while speaking. Goldie stared at his glass, then at me. I pretended to forget Wesley's name. Her suspicion vanished beneath satisfaction. She recorded me calling Wesley William, and then correcting myself, while Trent became drowsy. They were not waiting for age to make me confused. They were helping it happen. Dr. Voss arrived after dessert and asked 6 questions while Goldie filmed. I paused twice. Without asking about medication, sleep, grief, or my drink, she wrote, disorientation. Trent tried to stand and gripped the table. Something is wrong, he said. Goldie whispered for him to sit down, terrified that the doctor might examine the wrong patient. I told Dr. Voss that Trent seemed confused. She closed her folder and said fatigue affected people differently. That answer confirmed she had not come to evaluate anyone. She had come to document me. Goldie placed the stewardship agreement in front of me again. I signed the removable cover sheet Sterling had prepared, using a shaky version of my name. Trent folded everything before checking the page. They believed they possessed control of the farm. On my way out, Wesley hugged me and slipped something into my coat pocket. I did not look until I reached Sterling's car 2 streets away. It was a pharmacy receipt for 30 tablets of Zolpidem issued to Goldie 3 days earlier. On the back, Wesley had written, "She crushes these into your tea." Sterling drove me directly to an urgent care clinic. Tests were collected under chain of custody, and a swab from my straw contained a sedative capable of causing confusion, poor balance, and memory gaps. Goldie had arranged the questions, doctor, camera, and symptoms. Her evidence was being chemically manufactured. The next morning she called to say I had become disoriented at dinner and should voluntarily enter Hawthorne before I hurt myself. I apologized and asked whether Wesley had noticed. Her voice changed. "He worries too much, Daddy. We may send him somewhere with more structure." I understood the warning. Wesley had seen the drugged tea, and Goldie had begun planning how to remove the witness inside her own home. Before we ended the call, I agreed to another dinner the following week. She thought I was returning because I no longer trusted my mind. I was returning because the bravest person in that house had just told me where she kept the poison. The pharmacy receipt proved Wesley had seen more than he could safely say. Renee warned that acting too early could expose Wesley and destroy evidence. 2 days later, I mailed him Helen's old chess book with no note inside. That night, my phone rang from the payphone outside a grocery store. "Grandpa, I only have 3 minutes." His voice was barely above a whisper. I told him none of this was his fault, and asked whether anyone had hurt him. "Not with their hands," he said. Goldie searched his room, monitored his phone, and had removed his bedroom lock. Wesley said he began recording them 4 months earlier because their conversations changed whenever he entered a room. He had moved the files onto a storage drive hidden inside an old video game case. "There are 27 recordings," he said. "One explains the doctor. Another explains what they will do after they get your farm." I asked him to bring the drive to our next dinner. He refused. Goldie had started checking his pockets before he left the house. Trent had purchased a ticket in his name for a boarding school in Utah. Departure was 6 days after the guardianship hearing. The school accepted forced nighttime transport. They meant to remove him before he could speak. Renee designed a safer transfer. At Wesley's weekly church program, I remained in the sanctuary, while Renee waited near a side entrance. During a hymn, Wesley dropped the game case inside a donation box and returned unnoticed. Renee collected it wearing gloves and copied the drive while preserving the original. Wesley had labeled the folders with dates and short descriptions. One recording captured Goldie saying, "Grief made me easy to influence." Another caught Trent asking how soon a guardian could borrow against land. Goldie replied, "Before Dad understands what happened, the money will already be inside Vale Ridge." Dr. Voss coached them to turn forgotten names into impairment, self-defense into paranoia, and grief into fixation. She advised, provoking my anger on camera. Then we heard Goldie ask how much medicine could be used without appearing in a blood test. Dr. Voss answered that timing mattered more than quantity. The recording connected Dr. Voss directly to the drugging. The most painful file had no label. Goldie and Trent were arguing in their kitchen after midnight. Trent said they should stop because Wesley was becoming suspicious. Goldie answered that her son was emotional like Helen and would ruin everything if allowed to speak. "Once Dad is placed," she said, "Wesley goes to Utah. By the time anyone listens to him, the assets will be moved." Trent asked whether she felt guilty. Goldie was silent for several seconds. "Guilt does not pay February's note." Wesley had also captured dates, account names, passwords, and a calendar showing Dr. Voss would evaluate me after Goldie served tea. A 15-year-old had built the case adults failed to see. I listened to his careful breathing between recordings and understood how long he had carried this alone. He had protected me while no one was protecting him. We made 3 encrypted copies. Sterling kept one, Renee delivered one to a prosecutor, and the third entered a sealed court filing so it could not disappear if they discovered Wesley. I told Wesley that Helen would have been proud, but courage did not require him to remain in danger. If he ever felt unsafe, he was to leave through the back gate, walk to the fire station, and say Sterling's full name. At our next dinner, Wesley never looked at me. Goldie searched his coat before allowing him to sit down. Halfway through the meal, she announced that a school in Utah could help him become less anxious. Wesley asked whether he had a choice. "Children do not always understand what protects them," she said, looking directly at me. The same sentence justified taking his freedom and mine. As I left, Wesley moved one pawn forward on the chessboard near the hallway. It was our signal that he understood the escape plan. Goldie believed silence meant obedience. She did not know her son had already placed 27 witnesses inside the hands of the court. The 27 recordings did not form a confession in one clean sentence. They formed something more convincing: a timeline. Renee arranged them by date, while Sterling matched every conversation to an email, payment, or court filing. The earliest file had been made in August, long before Goldie claimed she became worried about my memory. Trent was explaining that Vale Ridge could survive if they controlled my farm for 90 days. Goldie asked whether a guardianship would let her borrow against it without my consent. He said the court might require an appraisal. She answered, "Then we choose the appraiser before we choose the doctor." The appraiser was on Vale Ridge's payroll. His private report valued my land at $2.4 million, while the probate draft listed $910,000. One valuation enabled a cheap sale, the other secured refinancing. A September recording explained the stolen, notarized pages. Trent said my existing signature looked too steady to support their story, so Goldie practiced copying it with a tremor. A handwriting specialist matched Goldie's practice attempt to the medical release and guardianship affidavit. The signature proving my incapacity had been created by the person alleging it. Dr. Voss advised using ordinary people to support her evaluation. Goldie asked my pastor, pharmacist, neighbor, and former manager whether grief made me distracted, then rewrote their concern as evidence of decline. All four denied questioning my competence. The November files revealed what would happen after the court granted control. I would enter Hawthorne on a temporary basis. My phone and visits would be restricted, my accounts would pay Vale Ridge management fees, and Trent would transfer the farm to a company under his brother's name. Helen's jewelry and our furniture would be sold as medical expenses. When Trent suggested preserving Helen's piano for Wesley, my daughter replied, "Sentiment is how Dad kept us poor." Helen and I had paid for college, her first car, and her wedding. Goldie called any life without luxury poverty. The final group of recordings explained the urgency. An investor threatened to report Trent for using project deposits to cover old debts. He needed $940,000 by February 15th. Guardianship would give Goldie access to my certificates of deposit within days, but only if Dr. Voss described an immediate risk. That was why they drugged the tea. They needed a fall, a confused telephone call, or an angry outburst serious enough to justify emergency control before the normal hearing. On one recording, Trent asked what would happen if the medication injured me. Goldie answered, "Then the case becomes easier." Sterling replayed it at my request. Her calmness was worse than anger. She was not speaking in anger. She had calculated my injury as a favorable outcome. Then, Wesley's chair scraped across the recorded kitchen floor. Goldie realized he had been listening and demanded his phone. Wesley said he would tell me everything. Goldie accused me of manipulating Wesley and said protecting family meant removing a confused person. Wesley answered, "Grandpa still sees me. You only see what people are worth." For several seconds, no one spoke. Then Goldie said, "When this is over, you will not be here to interfere." That threat transformed the boarding school ticket from a parenting decision into witness removal. Renee contacted the county prosecutor and a child advocate that afternoon. Combined with the forgery, sedative, false appraisal, and payment to Dr. Voss, the recordings established coordination. Sterling filed an emergency motion sealing the evidence and requested that Goldie receive no notice until Wesley could be protected. I signed an affidavit describing what happened at dinner, but the last paragraph took me nearly an hour. It asked whether I believed my daughter posed a danger to me. A father spends his life asking whether his child is safe. Writing yes felt like cutting through every memory we shared, but refusing to write it would leave Wesley inside the danger he had revealed. I signed. That night, another file arrived through the secure account Wesley had created. It had been recorded that morning. Trent said the court might appoint an independent doctor. Goldie replied that it would not matter once I drank enough tea to fail any test. Then she added, "Dad stopped being my father when he chose that farm over my future. I stood in Helen's kitchen listening to our daughter rewrite a lifetime of love into a debt she believed I owed. For the first time, I stopped asking how to bring Goldie back. I began asking how to make sure she could never do this to Wesley again. Goldie moved the Utah departure forward by 4 days. We learned because Wesley sent a single chess symbol through the secure account, a black rook, our signal that he could not leave the house. Renee found a new Thursday ticket. North Star Youth Transport would arrive at 3:30 before dawn and restrain Wesley if he resisted. The judge would not review Sterling's emergency request until morning. Taking Wesley without an order could be called kidnapping. He had to leave voluntarily and reach a mandated reporter. At 9 that evening, Goldie called me. Her voice was pleasant, but I heard drawers opening behind her. She asked whether Wesley had left anything at my house. I said he had forgotten a chess book. Anything electronic? She asked. I pretended not to understand. She claimed Trent's missing drive had caused Wesley to experience delusions. She was constructing a diagnosis for him just as she had for me. Then she asked me to come over. Dr. Voss wanted to complete my final evaluation, and Goldie claimed seeing me might calm Wesley before his trip. I agreed because Wesley needed someone inside. Renee placed a transmitter beneath my belt, while 2 officers waited near the fire station if Wesley reached it. I arrived at 10:15. Trent stood in the office feeding papers into a shredder. The blue estate case lay open beside him, empty. Goldie searched my coat and asked about Helen's chess book. I pretended not to remember. Dr. Voss began the evaluation in the dining room. She gave me a memory test while Goldie filmed and interrupted my correct answers, insisting I had forgotten details I had just stated. Wesley watched from the doorway. I looked toward the chessboard on the shelf and said, "Sometimes the safest move is through the back rank." His eyes shifted once toward the kitchen. He understood. A shout came from Trent's office. He had discovered Sterling's mark on the false document. "This is a setup," he shouted. Goldie stopped recording. Trent rushed into the dining room holding the unsigned stewardship agreement. He demanded to know where the originals were. I stopped pretending. I straightened and recited the date, his payment account, and every test object. Dr. Voss's face changed first. Goldie looked past me toward Wesley. She finally understood who had helped me. "You little traitor," she said. Wesley ran. Goldie grabbed my arm and ordered me to call him back. I pulled free and told her touching me again would be recorded as assault. She smashed my watch against the table, unaware it still transmitted to Renee. Wesley avoided the road, cut through a drainage field, and reached the fire station in 6 minutes. The captain called Sterling and police. Goldie tried to follow, but Dr. Voss blocked the door and demanded that her name be removed from whatever investigation was coming. Officers returned with Wesley wrapped in a fire department blanket. He told them about the drugged tea, the threats, the recordings, and the men scheduled to take him at 3:30. North Star confirmed the order, and a judge granted Wesley emergency placement with me. The advocate photographed a bruise on his wrist where Trent had grabbed him earlier that week and collected the transport contract from Goldie's printer. It described Wesley as violent, although his school and medical records contained no behavioral incident. Goldie had manufactured a second false patient inside the same family. Wesley asked whether telling the truth meant he would never see his mother again. The advocate said that decision did not belong to him tonight. His only responsibility was to be safe. Relief and grief crossed his face together. He had escaped the house, but he still loved the person who made escape necessary. I understood that contradiction better than anyone. Goldie stood on the porch insisting she was a mother protecting a disturbed child. Wesley did not look at her. He walked to my truck, carrying only his backpack and Helen's chess book. As we drove toward the farm, he asked whether he had destroyed my case by running. "No," I said. "You proved it." In the mirror, Goldie grew smaller beneath the porch light. For months, she had called control protection. That night, her son reached safety by refusing both words. Wesley slept for 13 hours after we reached the farmhouse. Sterling arrived at 8 with 2 priorities. We had to prove my competence through an examiner no one could question, and we had to prevent Goldie from using the emergency petition to reach my assets before the hearing. Dr. Hannah Birdwell, a forensic geriatric psychiatrist from Duke, agreed to evaluate me that afternoon. She had no relationship with Sterling, my family, or Vale Ridge. The examination lasted 4 hours. She tested memory, judgment, medication knowledge, and financial reasoning. I explained Trent's debts, the conflicting appraisals, and the authority hidden in his agreement. Then she asked why I had pretended to forget names at dinner. Because the people judging my mind had already decided what every correct answer meant, I said. I needed evidence of the test, not a better score. Her report concluded that I possessed full decisional capacity, above average memory for my age, and a sophisticated understanding of my property. She found no dementia, delusion, or psychiatric condition supporting guardianship. She also documented that normal grief had been mischaracterized as disease. While I completed the evaluation, Sterling activated the protections Helen and I had built years earlier. An independent fiduciary took temporary management authority, while my bank froze guardianship requests and the county placed an identity alert on the deed. Even temporary control would leave the assets beyond Trent's reach. Renee concentrated on Dr. Voss. The doctor's public record looked clean, but guardianship files revealed a pattern hidden across 3 counties. In 9 cases over 6 years, she had diagnosed severe impairment after evaluations lasting less than 30 minutes. 7 patients were placed in facilities within a month. 5 homes were sold to companies connected to relatives who requested the evaluations. 1 man regained independence after another doctor found no disorder, but his house had already been demolished. His niece saved an email promising language suitable for emergency intervention before Dr. Voss met him. Vale Ridge sent Dr. Voss $18,500. But the money traveled through a consulting company owned by Nolan Price, the appraiser. Price referred her in 4 earlier cases and purchased 2 properties sold under those orders. Goldie and Trent had hired an existing machine. Technicians reconstructed Trent's shredded invoice, offering Dr. Voss another $25,000 after I entered Hawthorne. It supplied 3 required phrases for her report, meaning the diagnosis had been written in advance. Dr. Voss offered to withdraw her statement. Sterling refused a private correction, notified the medical board and prosecutor, and subpoenaed her communications. An email showed that, before she resumed visiting me, Goldie asked whether loneliness, repeated stories, and hesitation over financial questions could support incapacity. Dr. Voss replied that isolated behaviors meant little, but a family member could create a persuasive pattern through consistent documentation. Goldie answered, "Tell me what to watch for, and I will make sure it happens." Her concern had been manufactured to serve the plan. That evening, Goldie attempted one last shortcut. She called the sheriff and claimed I had abducted Wesley during a psychotic episode. Deputies saw Wesley's placement order and Dr. Birdwell's report. Goldie's accusation became another documented falsehood. After the deputies left, Wesley asked whether the report meant we had already won. The hearing was 4 days away. Sterling assembled the medical report, appraisals, forgery analysis, laboratory results, payments, invoice, and recordings. Together they revealed one design. Goldie thought she would enter court as the worried daughter of a declining father. She did not know her own expert had become the center of a criminal investigation. Her financial motive was documented, and every asset she hoped to seize had already been locked. The night before our final preparation, I found Wesley asleep at Helen's kitchen table, with the chess book beneath his arm. I covered him with her old quilt, and understood what victory had to mean. It was not keeping the farmhouse. It was ensuring that neither of us would ever again need permission from Goldie to leave a room. On December 14th, I entered probate court, wearing the navy suit Helen had chosen for my retirement dinner. I wanted the judge to see an ordinary older man who still owned his decisions. Wesley waited in a separate room with his advocate because Sterling refused to make him sit across from his parents. Goldie and Trent were already at the petitioner's table. She wore Helen's missing pearl earrings. Trent's confidence faded when Dr. Birdwell, Renee, and 2 financial investigators entered. The hearing began with Goldie's attorney describing a loving daughter forced to act because grief had left her father confused and dangerous. He cited my forgotten keys, the wrong name I used for Wesley, my hesitation during Dr. Voss's test, and my refusal to accept care. Dr. Voss's report called me paranoid, financially vulnerable, and incapable of living alone. Goldie testified, "I only want my father safe." Sterling asked one question on cross-examination. "If safety was your purpose, why did your husband's company appraise his farm before any doctor examined him?" Goldie claimed the appraisal estimated care costs. Sterling placed both versions before her, $910,000 for probate and $2.4 million for Vale Ridge's lender. Sterling displayed an email in which she wrote, "Use the lower number in court. The bank gets the real one." Trent stopped taking notes. Next, Dr. Birdwell testified. She described the 4-hour independent evaluation and explained that my memory, reasoning, and financial judgment were above average for my age. She explained that grief did not prove dementia and that sedated behavior could not support a valid diagnosis. The laboratory report appeared on the courtroom screen. It identified zolpidem residue on my straw and documented chain of custody. The pharmacy receipt showed Goldie collected the prescription. Dinner video showed Goldie pouring the glass. She called the contamination accidental. Sterling played Dr. Voss's recorded answer that timing mattered more than quantity. Dr. Voss's attorney advised her not to speak. Sterling then presented the $18,500 payment, the reconstructed $25,000 invoice, and the required phrases supplied for her final diagnosis. Their expert invoked her right against self-incrimination. The forged documents came next. A handwriting specialist enlarged Goldie's practice signatures beside the medical release and affidavit. Curtis's footage showed Trent stealing the case. Sterling revealed the blank line beneath the removable sheet. "They obtained evidence of their attempt," he said. Sterling moved to the financial motive. Vale Ridge owed $940,000 by February 15th. They had drained Wesley's education fund, promised my land to a lender, and selected Trent's brother's company as buyer. The proposed Hawthorne admission created an $11,600 monthly expense that would justify an emergency sale. Room 214 had been reserved before any evaluation. Asked whether she planned for my care or my property, Goldie remained silent. Then Sterling requested permission to play Wesley's recordings. Goldie objected, but Wesley's advocate had authenticated the files. The recordings captured Goldie selecting the appraiser, Dr. Voss coaching language, and Trent planning to move my money. In the fourth, Trent asked what would happen if the medication injured me. Goldie's voice answered, "Then the case becomes easier." The final recording concerned Wesley. Goldie called him a threat, ordered the Utah transport, and said he would not be present to interfere. North Star's contract was shown beside school records, proving Wesley had never been violent. The judge removed her glasses. "Mrs. Vale, did you intend to institutionalize both your father and your son to prevent either from challenging these transactions?" Goldie looked at me and said, "He was going to leave everything to Wesley." What was I supposed to do? Her attorney closed his eyes. Sterling's closing statement lasted less than a minute. This petition was not created because Buck Lawson lost capacity. It was created because he retained the capacity to say no. The judge dismissed the guardianship petition with prejudice. She stated that age, grief, and family disagreement could never justify stripping a competent adult of liberty. She also found probable cause that the petition itself had been used to facilitate financial exploitation. The ruling meant Goldie could not simply withdraw, change doctors, and file the same story again in another courtroom. The lie had not only failed, it had become part of the public record. She voided Goldie's documents, protected Wesley, and referred the forgery, drugging, exploitation, and false medical evidence for investigation. Dr. Voss surrendered related files. While investigators seized Trent's business records, Goldie rose and whispered, "Daddy, please." I stopped beside her. "You had 6 months to tell the truth," I said. Wesley needed only 6 minutes to reach it. Outside, my grandson waited near the courthouse steps. He did not ask whether we had won. He asked whether anyone could make us go back. I put Helen's chess book into his hands and told him no. They had entered court expecting to take control of my life. They left without control of their own story. The ruling protected us, but it did not repair us. Wesley woke from nightmares, so I installed a lock on his door and gave him the only key. He cried because something ordinary felt like freedom. A family court later granted me long-term guardianship with supervised contact for Goldie. Wesley was not forced to speak with her. His therapist taught him that love and distance could coexist. Trent's business collapsed before February. He had moved project deposits, falsified reports, and promised my farm without authority. Vale Ridge entered bankruptcy, and Trent pleaded guilty to fraud, exploitation, and forgery, with restitution required. Dr. Voss lost her license and faced charges for conspiracy, false evidence, and the drugging. Earlier cases were reopened, while Nolan Price surrendered his appraisal license. Goldie's consequences were the hardest for me to describe. She pleaded guilty to attempted financial exploitation, forgery, child endangerment, and administering the sedative. Her sentence included custody, restitution, and restricted contact. She sent 11 letters. The first blamed Trent, Grief, Helen, and me, then asked how a father could let his daughter go to prison. I left the others with Sterling. Refusing those letters did not mean I hated Goldie. It meant I no longer allowed her need for an answer to become my obligation. Months later, one final statement admitted, I knew Dad was competent. I knew Wesley was telling the truth. I chose what benefited me. I placed that page in Helen's desk. Accountability began only when explanations stopped pretending to be innocence. Wesley returned to public school the following fall. Safety slowly became less surprising. Wesley joined robotics, made friends, and helped rebuild the tractor. When its engine started, his laughter no longer checked whether anyone disapproved. I restored Wesley's education fund under an independent trustee and changed my estate plan so blood alone granted no control. The farmhouse would eventually become a small legal clinic for older adults facing coercive guardianship, funded by part of my trust, and named the Helen Lawson Center for Independent Living. A year later, we planted a red maple beside Helen's grave. Wesley asked whether his mother might become safe one day. I told him people could change, but change did not create a debt in those they injured. If she becomes better, I said, that belongs to her. Whether you open the door belongs to you. He placed a white knight beneath the tree, no longer needing a secret signal. I still loved my daughter. Some mornings, that love arrived as anger. On others, it arrived as grief for the child she had been. I stopped demanding that either feeling disappear. Healing was not forgetting the danger or wishing her punishment harsher. It was building a life in which her choices no longer determined whether Wesley and I felt safe. But love is not legal authority. It is not access to another person's home, money, forgiveness, or future. Goldie believed family entitled her to make my choices. Trent believed age made my resistance temporary. Dr. Voss believed professional language could turn theft into care. They were all wrong for the same reason. They confused control with protection. Growing older did not make me invisible. Grieving did not make me incompetent. Forgiving did not require me to become available for another injury. The quietest person in their house saved me because truth needs courage, preservation, and somewhere safe to be heard. Had Sterling called 1 minute later, I might have entered room 214. But without returning to Goldie's house, Wesley might still have believed he was alone. I thought I was fighting to keep my farm. In the end, the farm was only the ground beneath a larger decision. I chose not to surrender my voice, and my grandson learned that he did not have to surrender his either. Helen once told me a home was not the place where a family shared a name. It was the place where no one had to earn the right to feel safe. Wesley and I finally built that home together.